Hello, I'm Mike Bain from Christian Voice New Zealand. Now, like you, I've been closely watching the news coming out of Israel, and while many are grabbing their Bibles and some of today's so-called prophets are trying to make pieces of the jigsaw fit Bible prophecy. Now, if you're a regular subscriber to Christian Voice New Zealand, you'll know that we've been watching and warning about the clear indicators relating to the world situation and the times that we live in. Now, without getting too excited about the times, I asked a friend yesterday if this was the beginning of the end, then why are we still here? His answer was simple. As God's people, we've work to do. This conflict gives you and I the opportunity to speak freely about what is to come. My friend suggested it's time for Christians to hit others in the forehead with a 2x4 plank. I think he was speaking hypothetically, given his background in the armed service. I'm not so sure. However, I think the church itself needs a hit with the plank to awaken it from the state of slumber it finds itself in. Throughout the Bible, you'll find the word Selah, noted about 74 times. You'll find it in books like Habakkuk and also Psalms. Well, Selah is a musical term to take a pause, and that's what we're saying to you today. Take a pause, take a breath, pray for understanding before racing in and tell everybody that the sky is falling. When I first heard the news of the conflict, my mind immediately went to the question, what's behind this? Today I received an explanation from a Christian in the United States, which I'm about to read through for you. But before I commence, I personally agree his explanation is plausible. Call me a conspiracy theorist, but I don't mind. But at the end of it, you make up your own mind. But I think we can agree there is evil intent in what's happening right now in the Middle East, and it's the work of Satan. Now, my correspondent writes that he's kept his eye on the Israel situation for the past few days, and here's what he's learnt, and here are his blunt and honest thoughts. 1. Israel chose to ignore intelligence from Egyptian officials about the major attack coming from Hamas. 2. Multiple former IDF soldiers and Israeli intelligence personnel have come forward online and said there's a 0% chance Israel was unaware of this attack beforehand or couldn't have prevented it. Number 3. We've just watched unsophisticated terrorists on hang gliders soar into one of the most heavily defended and surveilled countries on the planet. 4. Within 48 hours of the attack, we're now suddenly seeing enormous support for an American war with Iran and the genocide of Palestinian people. He said, I'm witnessing American pastors and formerly level-headed influencers in our world completely lose their minds and call for genocide. It's unsurprising but insane to watch. If the events of the past 3 years have taught me anything, it's that when people get whipped into an emotional frenzy, critical thinking completely goes out of the window. People, he said, become highly suggestible and will rush to extremely dangerous conclusions without thinking about the consequences. I think this is what we're all witnessing with the situation in Israel. He said, I'm reminded of Pearl Harbor and 9/11. In both scenarios, the American government received intelligence in advance of the attacks, but they chose not to prevent the attacks. Why? The American government was willing to sacrifice the lives of American citizens in order to advance its geopolitical goals. Pearl Harbor gave the justification to enter World War II. 9/11 gave justification to invade the Middle East and drastically expand the American military-industrial complex and our surveillance apparatus. They were brutal and extremely traumatic events for the American public to witness. The emotional trauma, he says, caused people to get whipped into an emotional frenzy. America wanted one thing in response to these attacks, the blood of our enemies. And he said, I see the same scenario playing out now. People are being whipped into a frenzied bloodlust. And in their frenzied bloodlust, people are overlooking some seriously important facts here, notably, 1, the fact that none of this adds up. 2. Innocent civilians are being threatened with genocide. And 3. Escalated violence in the Middle East and a war with Iran both risk the rest of the planet getting dragged into World War III. What happened in Israel this weekend was obviously gut-wrenching and awful to witness. But I don't trust Israel's so-called intelligence failure, nor do I trust the snakes in Washington calling for war with Iran, and I sure as hell no longer trust any of the emotionally frenzied influencers calling for explicit genocide of innocent civilians. He said this was a defining moment in history, like Pearl Harbor, 9/11, COVID, the beginning of the Ukraine war, etc. And a lot of people just got played. He said people responded by going full mask off, exposing themselves as reckless and incapable of exercising sound judgment in moments of chaos and heightened emotion. And we're now at the brink of World War III because of it. This is all worth noting, but there's a high likelihood there'll be more chaos throughout the rest of this decade. There'll be more psychological operations. There'll be more moments in time in which cooler heads ought to prevail, but people will get whipped into an emotional frenzy instead. He said, keep your wits about you and be cautious in whom you allow yourself to be influenced by. Recognise that governments and intelligence agencies, they're spending enormous resources waging psychological operations on social media non-stop when stuff goes down like this. Remember that when chaos is at its peak, history shows there's almost always a hidden agenda being played out, and that hidden agenda is always designed to prey on our base emotions to facilitate a desired end result. Okay, so that's from our Christian in America. But let me remind you that I've mentioned at the outset there are many opinions about what is happening in the Middle East. As Christians, we're not to sit on our hands and hope that someone else will preach the good news. The spirit of Haman is in the air, just as it was in the days of King Xerxes, found in the book of Esther. Back then, it was just one person who had the courage to speak the truth into the ear of the king. One person, Queen Esther, for whom such a time was this. This is our moment in time. It is such a time when we should be speaking. If there's only one thing you do in your Christian walk with God, be faithful to His word and preach the good news. Your future and the future of our neighbours is dependent upon you simply by speaking. For such a time as this, you're a part of the generation that will see this through, but you can't be passive in your belief. You need to stand firm in the Word of God. Yes, my brothers and sisters, I'm hitting you with a 2x4 plank and encouraging you to put on that suit of armour that God has provided and speak the truth. Speak the words in the ears of anyone who will listen about the good news and the coming of Jesus Christ. The choice is yours. Make the right one. Pray for the strength that you need. But this, my friends, is the time that God has ordained for you. This was the plan He had for you. Whatever you do, pray for the people of Israel. Pray for the people of Palestine. Pray for everybody in the world. Pray for some world peace to happen overnight.